Imagine sitting by a warm campfire in the middle of a dark, quiet forest. The stars above are your only light, and the silence feels peaceful until it's not. Heavy footsteps, glowing eyes in the distance, and the terrifying realization that something is watching you. Tonight, we'll uncover four bone-chilling tales of campers who came face to face with the legendary Dogman. These stories will make you think twice before heading into the woods again. Story number 1. I never thought I'd be someone to share a ghost story, let alone one that still haunts me every time I close my eyes. But some things change you, etching themselves into your memory like deep grooves carved into old wood. It was supposed to be just another weekend, me, Jake, Lisa, and Mark, escaping the monotony of suburban life. We'd done this a dozen times. Pack up our tents, grab some cheap beer, and head into the woods for a couple of nights. This time, we chose the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. Lisa had heard about it from a coworker who swore it was both beautiful and haunting, filled with mysterious legends. Sounded perfect for a late summer adventure. We arrived late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows through the towering pines. The forest had an eerie beauty, trees so dense they blocked out most of the sky, the ground carpeted with a thick layer of needles that muffled our footsteps. We found a clearing not too far from a small stream and set up camp. Jake got the fire going while Mark and I pitched the tents. Lisa wandered off to gather more firewood, humming some tune that got lost among the trees. By nightfall, we were settled around the campfire, the flames dancing and crackling, sending sparks spiraling upward like tiny fireflies. We passed around a bottle of whiskey Jake had swiped from his dad's liquor cabinet, each swig burning a little trail of warmth down our throats. "Did you know this place is supposedly haunted?" Lisa said, her face illuminated by the orange glow. She had that mischievous glint in her eye. "Haunted by what? Ghost squirrels?" Mark chuckled. "No, seriously," she insisted. "They say the Jersey Devil roams these woods." "Ah, come on," Jake scoffed. "That's just a legend to scare kids." "Well, legend or not, people have reported seeing things out here," Lisa replied, taking another sip. "Strange creatures, unexplained noises, even disappearances." I rolled my eyes but couldn't deny that the setting was perfect for such tales. The towering trees, the thick underbrush, and the canopy blotting out the stars all contributed to an unsettling atmosphere. "All right, enough of that," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "Who's up for some s'mores?" We settled back into easy conversation, the initial creepiness fading as the warmth of the fire and the effects of the whiskey took hold. Time seemed to blur. Laughter came easily, and the worries of our everyday lives felt far away. It must have been close to midnight when I first noticed it, the silence. Lisa was in the middle of recounting some embarrassing story about Mark when I realized I couldn't hear the usual night sounds. No crickets chirping, no rustling of small creatures in the underbrush, not even the distant hoot of an owl. It was as if someone had hit the mute button on the forest. "Hey, do you guys hear that?" I interrupted. They all paused, looking at me quizzically. "Hear what?" Jake asked. "Exactly. There's nothing to hear." They fell silent, and I saw the realization dawn on their faces. The absence of sound was unnerving, a heavy blanket smothering the life out of the woods. "That's weird," Lisa murmured. "Maybe we're just scaring ourselves with all this Jersey Devil talk," Mark suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. Suddenly, a soft rustling came from above us. Lisa grabbed her flashlight. "Probably just a squirrel," she said, pointing the beam upward. Her hand shook slightly, the light wobbling as it passed over branches and leaves. Then it landed on something that shouldn't have been there. Two glowing red eyes stared back at us from high in the tree, unblinking and intense. They were set in a face that was both familiar and horrifying, a wolf-like snout with sharp features. But the body was humanoid, muscular, and covered in dark, matted fur. Clawed hands gripped the branch effortlessly. "Oh my God," Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible. The creature tilted its head slightly, as if studying us. Time seemed to freeze. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. "Is this some kind of joke?" Jake whispered, not taking his eyes off the thing. "Does that look like a joke to you?" Mark hissed back. Without warning, the creature moved. It leaped from the branch, landing silently on the forest floor just beyond the reach of our firelight. It stood up to its full height, easily 7 feet tall, and took a step toward us. The firelight caught its eyes again, which seemed to glow even brighter now. Long claws extended from its hands, and when it opened its mouth, we saw teeth sharp, glistening, and meant for tearing flesh. "Run," I managed to choke out. No one needed further encouragement. We scattered like leaves in the wind, each bolting in a different direction. I sprinted blindly into the woods, branches whipping against my face, the ground uneven beneath my feet. Behind me, I heard a guttural growl that turned my blood to ice. I didn't dare look back. My only thought was to get as far away as possible. The darkness was disorienting. Trees loomed up suddenly, and I narrowly avoided slamming into them. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled into a small ravine and tripped, falling hard onto the damp earth. I lay there, gasping for breath, every muscle screaming in protest, my ears strained for any sound of pursuit. But all I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. Minutes passed. The forest remained eerily silent, but now it felt like a protective cocoon rather than a menacing void. Slowly, I sat up, wincing at the pain in my scraped palms and knees. "Jake? Lisa? Mark?" I whispered hoarsely. No response. Fear for my friends gnawed at me, but I was too terrified to move. I huddled there, knees drawn to my chest, waiting for dawn or death, whichever came first. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I must have drifted into a restless sleep. When I awoke, pale light filtered through the trees. Morning had arrived, bringing with it the familiar sounds of the forest, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze. It was as if nature had resumed its normal course, oblivious to the horrors of the night. Cautiously, I stood up and tried to get my bearings. My mouth was dry, and my limbs felt heavy, but I knew I had to find the others. Retracing my steps was impossible. I had no idea which direction I'd come from. I decided to head toward what I hoped was the campsite, using the position of the rising sun as a guide. After an hour of stumbling through the underbrush, I heard voices, faint but unmistakable. Relief surged through me, pushing past a thicket. I emerged into our campsite clearing. Lisa, Jake, and Mark were there, looking as disheveled and shaken as I felt. "Oh, thank God," Lisa exclaimed when she saw me. Tears welled in her eyes. We gathered in a tight circle, a mix of hugs and relieved laughter that quickly gave way to a somber silence. "Did everyone make it through the night?" I asked. They nodded. "What the hell was that thing?" Jake demanded, his bravado from the previous night completely gone. "Do you think it was the Jersey Devil?" Lisa whispered. "I don't know what it was," Mark said grimly, "but we need to get out of here." We hastily began to pack up our gear. As we moved around the campsite, we noticed the signs. Deep claw marks scored the trunks of trees surrounding us, some reaching as high as 10 feet off the ground. The ground was marred with enormous footprints, paw prints, but larger than any animal native to these woods. "Look at this," Jake said, pointing to one of the prints. His hand trembled. "These claws," Lisa said, tracing the gouges in a tree with her fingertips. "They're not from any animal I've ever heard of." A chilling realization settled over us. Whatever we had encountered was real, and it had been close, very close. "Let's just grab what we can and leave the rest," I suggested. No one argued. We loaded our backpacks, leaving behind the tents and anything that would slow us down. As we made our way back to the trailhead, the forest seemed indifferent to our presence. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, birds sang, and small animals scurried through the underbrush. But the sense of unease never left us. Every snap of a twig made us jump, and we kept glancing over our shoulders, half expecting to see those red eyes staring back. We reached the cars without incident. As we piled in, Jake turned to me. "Do we tell someone about this?" "Tell them what?" I replied. "That we saw a monster in the woods? Who's going to believe us?" Mark added, "Maybe we should at least report it." Lisa suggested, "What if someone else gets hurt?" We considered this but ultimately decided that, without any concrete evidence, we'd be dismissed as overimaginative teenagers or worse, accused of fabricating the story for attention. As we drove away, the forest receded in the rearview mirror, but the experience clung to us like a shadow. None of us spoke much on the way home. The radio played softly, a stark contrast to the turmoil in our minds. In the weeks that followed, we tried to resume normal life: school, part-time jobs, family dinners, all the usual routines. But something had shifted. I found myself plagued by nightmares, waking in a cold sweat with the image of those glowing eyes burned into my vision. One afternoon, I met up with Lisa at a local diner. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes. "You're not sleeping either." "Huh?" I asked, attempting a weak smile. She shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I see it. I can't stop thinking about what happened." "Maybe we should talk to someone," I suggested. "A professional." "Yeah, maybe," she replied, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "Do you think it followed us?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," she sighed. "Sometimes I feel like someone's watching me." I wanted to dismiss her concerns, but the truth was, I'd felt it too. That prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the fleeting shadows at the edge of my vision. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. I found scratches on the outside of my bedroom window, high enough that no normal person could have reached. At night, I heard distant growls that could have been the wind but weren't. My parents chalked it up to teenage angst, but I knew better. One evening, Jake called me in a panic. "It's outside my house," he whispered frantically. "What is?" I asked, my heart racing. "The thing from the woods. I saw it across the street, watching me." "Jake, calm down. Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm not imagining it." I didn't know what to say. "Lock your doors and windows. I'm coming over." By the time I arrived, there was no sign of the creature, but Jake was visibly shaken. We sat in his living room, the curtains drawn tight. "This is insane," he muttered. "Why is this happening?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe we disturbed it somehow. Or maybe it marked us," he said darkly. The thought sent a chill down my spine. We decided to gather the group to figure out what to do. Lisa, Mark, Jake, and I met at a secluded spot by the river, somewhere public but quiet. "Has anyone else experienced anything unusual?" I asked. They all nodded. Mark described finding large footprints in his backyard. Lisa mentioned strange noises at night, like claws scraping against metal. "Maybe we need to go back," Mark suggested hesitantly. "Are you out of your mind?" Jake snapped. "Why would we do that?" "To face it," Mark replied. "Maybe there's something we can do to stop this." Reluctantly, we agreed. We armed ourselves with whatever we could: flashlights, kitchen knives, even a baseball bat. Felt woefully inadequate. Returning to the Pine Barrens under the cover of daylight did little to alleviate our fear. The forest seemed to welcome us back with silent anticipation. We reached the old campsite, now overgrown as if months had passed instead of weeks. The claw marks remained, a stark reminder of that night. "So, what now?" Lisa asked nervously. Before anyone could answer, a familiar silence descended upon the woods. The birds stopped singing, the wind died, and the forest held its breath. Then we heard it, a low growl, resonating from all around us. "Stay together," I whispered, gripping the baseball bat tightly. The creature emerged from behind a massive pine. stepping into the clearing with deliberate slowness. In the daylight, it was even more terrifying. Matted fur covered its body, muscles rippling beneath the surface. Its eyes, though, were the same burning red, filled with an intelligence that felt almost human. "We mean you no harm," Mark stammered, raising his hands. The creature tilted its head, a guttural sound emanating from deep within its chest. Then it spoke not in words, but in a series of growls and snarls that conveyed a chilling message. "Intruders must pay." I felt a surge of adrenaline. "Run!" But as we turned, smaller creatures stepped out from the shadows. Surrounding us, they were similar in form but smaller, their eyes lacking the fiery intensity of the first. "We're trapped," Lisa whimpered. Fear threatened to paralyze me, but I forced myself to think. "Climb the trees," I shouted. "Get off the ground." We scrambled up the nearest trees, the rough bark scraping our hands. The creatures lunged but missed, their claws raking the air just below our feet. From my precarious perch, I could see the first creature watching us, its expression unreadable. Then it let out a howl, a long, mournful sound that echoed through the forest. The smaller creatures retreated at the sound, disappearing back into the shadows. "What just happened?" Jake called from his tree. "I don't know," I replied, my heart pounding. The creature gazed up at us one last time before turning and melting into the forest. We waited, clinging to the branches until our limbs ached and the sun began to set. When we were certain they were gone, we carefully climbed down. "Let's get out of here," Mark said. No one argued. As we made our way back to the cars, the sounds of the forest gradually returned. It was as if nature had resumed its normal rhythm, oblivious to the terror we just experienced. We didn't speak on the drive home. Words felt inadequate. That night, I slept fitfully, plagued by dreams of red eyes and shadowy figures. In the weeks that followed, the strange occurrences ceased. The scratches disappeared, the noises stopped, and the feeling of being watched faded. We never spoke of it again. It was an unspoken agreement, a shared trauma best left buried. But sometimes, late at night, I think about those eyes and the intelligence behind them. I wonder what we stumbled upon in those woods, what ancient secrets lurk in the shadows of the pine barrens. And I can't shake the feeling that we were warned, spared for reasons beyond our understanding. I avoid forests now, content with the concrete and steel of the city. But every so often, I'll catch a glimpse of a shadow moving unnaturally, or hear a distant growl that raises the hairs on my neck. And I remember that some legends are real, and some secrets are best left undisturbed. Because once you've seen what's hidden in the darkness, you can never truly go back to the light. Story number 2. I never considered myself much of an adventurer. Sure, I've hiked a few trails and spent the occasional weekend camping with friends. But the great outdoors was more of a casual acquaintance than a close friend. So when my girlfriend, Emily, suggested a camping trip in the Appalachians, I was hesitant. "It's beautiful this time of year," she insisted, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "The leaves are changing, and it'll be a nice escape from the city." I looked up from my laptop, the glow reflecting off my glasses. "I don't know. Work's been crazy, and I was kind of looking forward to a quiet weekend at home." She gave me that playful smirk I could never resist. "Come on, David. Fresh air. No emails. Just us and nature. It'll be romantic." I sighed, knowing I'd lost the battle before it even began. All right, but you're in charge of the bugs." "Deal," she laughed, clapping her hands together. A week later, we were winding our way up a narrow mountain road, Emily humming along to the folk tunes playing softly on the radio. The dense forest flanked us on both sides, trees stretching skyward like ancient sentinels. The canopy above was a tapestry of oranges, reds, and yellows, a fiery farewell to summer. We arrived at the campsite late in the afternoon. It was a secluded spot Emily had found online, promising serenity and breathtaking views. Setting up the tent was surprisingly straightforward, and soon we had a cozy little home nestled among the pines. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we built a fire and cooked dinner, hot dogs skewered on sticks and marshmallows charred to perfection. The warmth of the flames warded off the evening chill, and we settled into our camp chairs, wrapped in blankets and each other's company. "Look at the stars," Emily whispered, her gaze fixed upward. "You can't see them like this back home." I followed her eyes to the sky, where a million pinpricks of light pierced the darkness. "It's incredible," I agreed. "Makes you feel small, doesn't it?" She leaned her head on my shoulder. "In the best way." We sat like that for a while, the crackling fire our only soundtrack. Eventually, Emily stood up, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Feel like going for a walk?" I raised an eyebrow. "Now? It's dark." "That's the point," she teased. "Live a little, David. Besides, I've got flashlights." I hesitated but relented when she pouted dramatically. "Fine, but if we get lost, I'm blaming you." "Deal," she grinned, handing me a flashlight. We set off along a narrow trail that wound deeper into the forest. The beam of my flashlight cut through the inky blackness, illuminating the path ahead. The woods were alive with nocturnal sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the chirping of crickets. "See, isn't this nice?" Emily whispered, slipping her hand into mine. "Yeah," I admitted, squeezing her fingers. "It is." We walked in comfortable silence, the cool night air refreshing. After a while, I checked my watch. "Maybe we should head back. It's getting late." She nodded. "Okay." Turning around, we retraced our steps, or so we thought. The trees began to look unfamiliar, and the path seemed less defined. "Are we going the right way?" I asked, a hint of concern creeping into my voice. Emily frowned. "I think so. I remember that fallen log." A sudden snap of a twig echoed behind us. We both stopped. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "Probably just an animal," she replied, but her grip on my hand tightened. We continued walking, a bit faster now. The sounds of the forest seemed to amplify, the rustling leaves louder, the shadows darker. Another crunch, closer this time. "Okay, that wasn't just me," Emily said, her eyes wide. I swung the flashlight beam behind us, the light dancing across the trees. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. "Is someone there?" Silence. "Maybe we should pick up the pace," I suggested. She didn't argue. We moved swiftly, the path underfoot becoming more uneven. The sense of being watched prickled at the back of my neck. Then came the footsteps, heavy and deliberate, matching our speed. They weren't the light, skittering sounds of a deer or raccoon. These were weighty, bipedal. "David," Emily's voice quavered. "Just keep moving," I urged. A low growl resonated through the trees, a sound that rumbled deep and feral. Panic surged. "Run," I shouted. We broke into a sprint, branches whipping against our faces, underbrush snagging at our ankles. The footsteps behind us quickened, closing the gap. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw a massive silhouette emerging from the shadows. A towering figure covered in matted black fur, eyes reflecting the cold gleam of the moon. It moved on two legs, muscles rippling beneath its hide, a long snout lined with glistening teeth. "Oh my God!" Emily screamed. "Go! Go!" I yelled, adrenaline fueling our flight. Our campsite came into view, the dying embers of our fire a beacon in the darkness. We raced toward the car, fumbling with the keys. "Get in," I shouted, wrenching the passenger door open for Emily before scrambling to the driver's side. The creature burst into the clearing, its roar piercing the night, a sound of primal rage that shook me to my core. I jammed the key into the ignition, hands trembling. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. "Come on, come on," I muttered, slamming the car into reverse. As we backed up, the creature lunged forward, its massive form illuminated in the headlights, a nightmarish blend of man and beast, claws like daggers extended from its hands, and its eyes burned with an unsettling intelligence. It struck the trunk with a force that jolted the entire car, the metal groaning under the impact. "Drive!" Emily screamed. I threw the car into gear and hit the gas. The tires spun for a heart-stopping second before finding traction. We sped down the dirt road, the creature in pursuit. "How is it so fast?" Emily cried. Looking back, I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. It was gaining on us, its gait swift and unnaturally fluid, muscles propelling it forward at an alarming speed. "Hold on," I yelled, pushing the accelerator to the floor. We barreled down the winding road, the car bouncing over potholes and rocks. The creature swiped at the rear of the car, claws screeching against metal. I swerved, nearly skidding off the path. "David, watch out!" I corrected just in time to avoid a tree, heart hammering in my chest. "Call someone," I shouted. Emily fumbled for her phone, hands shaking. No signal. The speedometer crept past 50 miles per hour, but the creature kept pace, its relentless pursuit a nightmare made real. "Faster," Emily urged. "I'm trying." At 60 miles per hour, the road began to straighten. The creature fell back slightly but didn't stop. "Maybe we can lose it on the main road," I said, more to myself than to her. The forest thinned, and the blessed sight of asphalt appeared ahead. We shot onto the main road, tires screeching as we veered onto the pavement. I accelerated, the car's engine whining in protest. In the mirror, the creature slowed, eventually coming to a stop at the edge of the woods. It stood there, watching us escape, its form shrinking into the distance. Only when it disappeared entirely did I begin to breathe again. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. "What was that?" "I don't know," I admitted, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. We drove in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound between us. It wasn't until we reached the safety of a well-lit gas station miles away that we finally stopped. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, I inspected the car. Deep gouges marred the trunk and rear fenders, for parallel slashes as if carved by giant claws. The metal was warped, paint stripped away. Emily stared at the damage, eyes wide. "This can't be real." I touched the marks, the edges sharp and jagged. "But it is." Inside the gas station, the clerk gave us a curious glance but didn't ask questions. We bought coffee we didn't drink and sat in a corner booth, the reality of what happened sinking in. "Do we tell someone?" Emily asked, her hands wrapped around the warm cup. "And say what?" "That we were chased by a..." "What? A werewolf?" She shook her head. "No one would believe us. Maybe it's better if we just forget it," I suggested, though I knew that was impossible. We returned home the next day, the trip back filled with uneasy silence. At Emily's apartment, we parted with a strained hug. "Call me later?" she asked. "Yeah," I promised. But days turned into weeks, and neither of us reached out. The shared trauma became a wall between us, something too terrifying to confront together. I took the car to a body shop, the mechanic raising an eyebrow at the damage. "What did you hit? A bear?" "Something like that," I mumbled. He whistled. "Must have been one hell of an impact. Can you fix it?" "Sure, but it'll take some time." I left the car and tried to resume normal life, burying myself in work. But sleep eluded me, nightmares of glowing eyes and relentless pursuit haunting every attempt at rest. One night, as I sat alone in my apartment, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Emily standing there, pale and frail. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. "Of course." I stepped aside, and she entered. She sat on the edge of the couch, wringing her hands. "It's not over," she whispered. A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" She looked up, tears welling in her eyes. "I've been seeing it, outside my window." In Reflections. I think it's following me. That's not possible, I said, though doubt gnawed at me. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, showing me a photo, a dark figure standing under a street lamp outside her building. Eyes glowing faintly. My mouth went dry. When was this taken? Last night. Have you told anyone else? She shook her head. Who would believe me? I paced the room, mind racing. Maybe we should go to the police. And say what? That we're being stalked by a monster. I didn't have an answer. That night, she stayed at my place. We double-checked the locks and closed all the curtains. Sleep was a distant hope. Around 2 a.m., a scratching sound echoed from the front door. A slow, deliberate scrape of claws against wood. We froze, hearts pounding. Did you hear that? She whispered. I nodded, gesturing for her to stay quiet. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. Then came the growl, a low, menacing rumble that vibrated through the walls. I reached for my phone, hands shaking, and dialed 911. 911. What's your emergency? The operator answered. Someone's trying to break into my apartment. I whispered. Are you in a safe location? We're inside, but they're at the door. Officers are on their way. Stay on the line. A heavy thud rattled the door, the frame creaking under the force. Emily clutched my arm, eyes wide with terror. Please hurry, I urged into the phone. Minutes stretched into eternity as the assault on the door continued. Wood splintered, the top hinge giving way. Sirens wailed in the distance. Growing closer, the creature let out a furious roar. Then the sounds stopped abruptly. We waited, breath held, until a firm knock came. Police! I opened the door to two officers, their hands hovering near their holstered weapons. Are you all right? One asked, scanning the room. We're fine now, I breathed. It was trying to break in. They inspected the damaged door, exchanging puzzled glances. Did you see who it was? No, I lied. It was dark. They took our statements, attributing the damage to a potential burglar or vandal. We'll have patrols in the area, they assured us. After they left, Emily and I sat in silence. It's not going to stop, she said finally. It wants us. Why? I demanded. What did we do? She shook her head. I don't know. Desperation led me back to the Appalachians. Searching for answers, I delved into local legends, folklore, anything that could explain the creature. An old librarian directed me to a dusty tome, its pages yellowed with age. Inside were accounts of a guardian spirit, a beast that protected the land from intruders. Those who crossed its path were marked. Marked for what? I asked. Depends, she replied enigmatically. Some say it seeks vengeance. Others believe it wants to reclaim what was lost. I returned home, more confused than ever. That night, Emily disappeared. She stopped answering her phone. Her apartment empty when I went to check. A missing persons report yielded nothing. Weeks passed with no leads. Then, one evening, I received a package, no return address. Inside was a single item, a necklace Emily always wore, a small silver locket. Attached was a note in shaky handwriting. It's coming for you next. Panic set in. I packed a bag and fled, driving aimlessly until I ended up in a motel miles away. Sleep eluded me, every sound outside the thin walls a potential threat. On the third night, exhaustion claimed me. I awoke to the feeling of being watched. In the corner of the room stood Emily, her figure shrouded in shadow. Emily, I whispered, relief flooding through me. She stepped into the dim light, and my heart sank. Her eyes glowed unnaturally, predatory gleam. A cruel smile twisted her lips, revealing sharp teeth. It's time, David, she hissed. I scrambled out of bed, backing toward the door. What happened to you? She advanced slowly. I saw the truth, embraced it. The door wouldn't budge, as if held shut by an unseen force. Don't fight it, she cooed. Join us. A growl emanated from outside the window, the same haunting sound I'd hoped never to hear again. Desperation took over. I grabbed a lamp and swung it at her. She dodged effortlessly, laughing. "There's no escape," she taunted. I threw the lamp through the window, shattering the glass. Without thinking, I leaped through the opening, cutting myself on the jagged edges. I hit the ground hard, pain flaring in my ankle. Limping, I ran toward my car. Behind me, I heard the creature roar, joined by Emily's eerie laughter. I reached the car and sped away, not daring to look back. That was months ago. I've been on the run ever since, never staying in one place too long. The nightmares persist, and every so often, I catch a glimpse, a shadow in the corner of my eye, a reflection that doesn't belong. I don't know what happened to Emily or how to stop this curse. All I know is that it's only a matter of time before they find me. If you're reading this, heed my warning. Some roads are best left untraveled, some secrets buried deep, because once you've been marked, there's nowhere to hide, and the darkness will consume you, one way or another. Story number 3. I needed to get away. The pressures of work had been mounting for weeks, a never-ending cascade of emails, meetings that led nowhere, and the insufferable hum of fluorescent lights that seemed to bore into my skull. The city was smothering me, and I craved the solace of the wilderness. So, I packed my gear and headed north to the dense forests of Wisconsin, a place where cell signals faded and the only emails were the whispers of the wind through the pines. I arrived at the edge of the forest late in the afternoon. The sun hung low, casting long shadows that danced among the trees. I found a secluded spot near a small, clear lake, a perfect mirror reflecting the fiery hues of the autumn foliage. After setting up my tent and building a modest fire, I settled in with a cup of instant coffee and watched as dusk painted the sky with strokes of purple and indigo. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of a loon. This was what I needed, a break from humanity, a chance to reset. As darkness enveloped the forest, I crawled into my tent, the comforting cocoon of nylon shielding me from the crisp night air. Wrapped in my sleeping bag, I felt the tension of the past weeks begin to melt away. Sometime around midnight, I awoke with a start. For a moment, I wasn't sure why. The fire had died down to glowing embers, casting a faint orange glow that seeped through the tent walls. I listened intently, holding my breath. Then I heard it, a heavy footfall, followed by another, circling just outside my tent. My first thought was a bear. I'd read enough to know that black bears were common in these parts. I remembered the advice: stay calm, make noise, don't run. But something about these footsteps felt off. They were deliberate, slow, almost methodical, unlike the random foraging of an animal. I reached over and quietly unzipped a pocket in my backpack, retrieving a flashlight and the bear spray I had packed more as a formality than out of genuine concern. The footsteps stopped directly in front of the tent's entrance. I could feel a presence, large and imposing. A low, guttural sound emerged, more a growl than a breath, reverberating through the still night air. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would give me away. I didn't dare move. Then, slowly, the fabric of the tent began to press inward. A massive hand, or what I thought was a hand, was feeling its way across the surface. It was covered in coarse hair, and the claws, the claws tore small holes in the nylon as it moved. Through those tiny perforations, slivers of moonlight pierced the darkness inside the tent. Paralyzed, I watched as the silhouette of this appendage moved with eerie grace, exploring the contours of the tent. It wasn't the curious probing of an animal, but something more intelligent, almost cautious, gathering what little courage I had left. I clicked on the flashlight. The beam was weak, the batteries drained from disuse, but it was enough. Through the thin fabric, the light illuminated the shape outside. The hand recoiled slightly, then there was silence. I dared to hope that whatever it was had been scared off. But then, a shadow fell over the tent as something large blocked out the moonlight. A face pressed against the tent wall, deforming it inward. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. A grotesque blend of man and beast. The snout was elongated like a wolf's, but the eyes, those eyes were disturbingly human, filled with a malevolent intelligence. They were amber, almost glowing, and they locked onto mine through the thin barrier between us. A snarl revealed rows of sharp teeth, and a hot, fetid breath permeated the tent, bringing with it the stench of decay. Panic overtook me. I screamed a raw, primal sound that seemed to startle the creature. It drew back momentarily. Seizing the opportunity, I grabbed the bear spray and aimed it at the spot where the face had been. I unleashed a torrent of the noxious spray, and a horrific roar erupted from outside. The entire tent shook violently as the creature lashed out, its claws ripping through the fabric with ease. I scrambled backward, entangled in my sleeping bag. As the tent collapsed around me, desperate, I fought my way out of the suffocating nylon shell and stumbled into the cold night. The fire pit's embers provided scant light, but it was enough to see the hulking figure recoiling, wiping at its face. It stood on two legs, towering at least 7 feet tall, with a muscular build that defied logic. Patches of dark fur covered its body, and its limbs were elongated, ending in those vicious claws. Our eyes met again. In that moment, I felt a surge of raw terror unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just fear of death, it was fear of something that shouldn't exist, something that defied the natural order. Without thinking, I turned and ran. The forest was a maze of shadows and obstacles, but adrenaline propelled me forward. Behind me, I could hear the creature recovering, its heavy footsteps breaking into a sprint. The sounds it made, a combination of snarls and almost human-like grunts, chilled me to my core. I raced through the trees, branches whipping against my face, the underbrush clawing at my legs. My only thought was to reach my truck parked a mile away at the trailhead. The path was barely visible, a thin ribbon of dirt winding through the darkness. The creature was gaining on me. I could hear its breath, ragged yet powerful, and the thud of its steps drawing closer. In a desperate move, I veered off the trail, plunging into a dense thicket. Thorns tore at my clothes and skin, but I pushed onward. Suddenly, the ground disappeared beneath me. I'd run straight over a ledge, tumbling down a steep embankment. I crashed through foliage before hitting the ground hard. The wind knocked out of me. Pain shot through my ankle, a sprain, maybe worse. I lay there, gasping, trying to regain my senses. Above, the canopy obscured any light from the moon, but I could make out the edge of the ledge I'd fallen from. The creature appeared there, silhouetted against the faint glow of the night sky. It scanned the area, his head moving in sharp, deliberate motions. I held my breath, willing myself to be invisible. The creature sniffed the air, then emitted a low growl. It began to climb down, not following the path I'd unintentionally created, but moving with an uncanny agility along the rocks. I had to move, ignoring the searing pain in my ankle. I crawled, then limped deeper into the forest. Each step was agony, but fear overrode any physical suffering. I could hear the creature behind me, moving faster now. Ahead, I spotted a narrow crevice in a rocky outcrop, a small cave or hollow. It was a slim chance, but it was all I had. I squeezed into the opening, the rough stones scraping my back and shoulders. Inside, the space was tight, barely enough to turn around. I waited, every muscle tensed. As the sounds of pursuit grew louder, the creature reached the area, its heavy breathing echoing in the stillness. Through a small gap, I saw it searching, those glowing eyes piercing the darkness. It approached the crevice, and for a horrifying moment, I thought it had found me. It extended a clawed hand toward the opening, sniffing the air. The musky odor of the creature filled the space, a nauseating blend of wet fur and something rotten. I pressed myself against the back wall, biting down on my lip to stifle any sound. Blood trickled down my chin, but I didn't dare move. The creature's claws scraped against the rock, inches from my face. Then, a distant sound broke the tension. A howl, similar but not identical to the creature's own. Paused, head snapping in the direction of the noise, with a final growl directed at my hiding spot. Turned and bounded away, disappearing into the forest with terrifying speed. I didn't move for what felt like hours, too afraid that it might return. Only when the first gray light of dawn seeped into the crevice did I dare to emerge. My body was stiff, every joint protesting as I pulled myself out. The forest in daylight was a different world. Birds chirped, and the soft rustle of small animals in the underbrush belied the horrors of the night before. But the tranquility was a thin veneer. I knew what lurked in these woods, using a broken branch as a makeshift crutch. I hobbled back toward the trail. It was slow going, each step a test of endurance. My mind raced, trying to process what I'd encountered. There was no rational explanation, no known animal matched that description. Reaching the trailhead, I spotted my truck, a sight that nearly brought me to tears. Fumbling with the keys, I clambered inside and locked the doors. Only when the engine roared to life did I feel a semblance of safety. As I drove away, I glanced back at the tree-line. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure standing there, watching. A tall silhouette with eyes that glinted in the morning light. I pressed the accelerator harder, putting as much distance between me and that place as possible. Back in the city, the events of that night replayed endlessly in my mind. Sleep was a stranger, my nights filled with nightmares that blurred the line between dream and reality. I scoured the internet for any information, legends, cryptids, local folklore. That's when I stumbled upon stories of the Dogman, a creature of myth that supposedly roamed the upper Midwest. Accounts dated back decades, even centuries, describing a bipedal canine with human-like intelligence. Most dismissed it as a hoax or mass hysteria, but I knew better. I debated telling someone, friends, family, even the authorities, but what could I say? That I'd been hunted by a mythical beast? I'd be labeled a lunatic. Instead, I withdrew, haunted by the knowledge that such things existed beyond our understanding. Weeks later, a news report caught my attention. A hiker had gone missing in the same forest. Search teams found no trace except for his abandoned campsite, which had been ravaged by what authorities described as a bear attack. But I knew. Guilt gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I should warn people, but fear of ridicule kept me silent. Instead, I write this account, hoping that perhaps it will serve as a cautionary tale. If you find yourself drawn to the solitude of the wilderness, be vigilant, stay aware of your surroundings, and if you sense that you're not alone, trust that instinct. Some things exist on the fringes of our reality, beings that defy explanation and logic. I no longer seek refuge in the woods. The city, with all its chaos and noise, now feels like a sanctuary, at least here. The monsters are ones I understand, but every so often, when the wind shifts just right, I catch a scent, a musky odor that sends a shiver down my spine, and I wonder if it's found me again, waiting in the shadows for another chance. Because some nightmares don't end when you open your eyes. Story number 4. I never believed in the supernatural. Ghosts, werewolves, creatures that go bump in the night. They were all just stories to me. Tales spun to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. But that was before last October, when a simple camping trip turned into a nightmare that still haunts me every time the sun dips below the horizon. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway, a chance for me and my college buddies to reconnect after graduation scattered us across the country. Mike suggested we head up to Michigan, near the Manistee National Forest. Great hiking trails, he said, and the fall colors are unbelievable. We were all in our late 20s, clinging to the remnants of youth while juggling the responsibilities of adulthood. There was Mike, ever the outdoorsman, Lisa, sarcastic and sharp-witted, Ben, whose idea of roughing it involved a 3-star hotel, and me, Jack, the skeptic who preferred the concrete jungle over towering pines. We arrived on a crisp Friday afternoon, the air scented with pine and damp earth. The campground was nearly empty, just a few RVs parked in the distance and an old couple tending to a fire. We set up our tents in a clearing surrounded by towering oaks and maples, their leaves a fiery tapestry of reds and oranges. As dusk settled, we gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. The conversation inevitably turned to local legends. "Ever hear about the Michigan Dogman?" Mike asked, a mischievous glint in his eye. Lisa rolled hers. "Oh, here we go." "Seriously," Mike continued, "it's a big deal around these parts. People have reported sightings since the late 1800s. A creature, half man, half dog, that prowls the forest at night." Ben smirked. "Sounds like someone had a few too many beers." I chuckled. "Or a marketing ploy to attract tourists." Mike leaned in, the fire casting eerie shadows on his face. "Laugh all you want, but people have gone missing in these woods. Hunters, hikers, even campers." "Well, that's comforting," Lisa said, tossing a stick into the flames. We let the subject drop, but an undercurrent of unease lingered. The forest seemed to close in around us, the canopy blotting out the starlight. The fire crackled, and somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. "I'm hitting the sack," Ben announced, stifling a yawn. One by one, we retreated to our tents. I lay awake, the sounds of the forest amplified in the darkness, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of nocturnal creatures. Sleep was elusive. Around midnight, I heard it, a howl unlike anything I'd ever encountered. It started low, almost a growl, then rose into a chilling wail that made the hairs on my arms stand up. It wasn't a coyote or a wolf. It was deeper, more resonant, echoing through the trees. I sat up, straining to listen. The howl came again, closer this time. Unzipping my tent, I stepped out into the cold night air. The campfire had dwindled to embers, casting a faint glow. Mike was already outside, flashlight in hand. "You heard it too?" I whispered. He nodded. "Probably just wildlife." Lisa emerged from her tent, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "What the hell was that?" Ben stumbled out, looking groggy. "Is someone messing with us?" Another howl pierced the night, this time so close it seemed to reverberate within my chest. "That's no animal I've ever heard," Mike said, his bravado slipping. We huddled together, eyes scanning the darkness. The forest, so inviting during the day, now felt menacing, each shadow harboring unseen threats. "I think we should get back in our tents," Ben suggested. "Wait it out until morning." "Wait for what?" Lisa snapped. "Whatever's out there is getting closer." A sudden rustling came from the underbrush to our left. Mike swung his flashlight toward the sound. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the gnarled roots and fallen leaves. "Probably a raccoon," he whispered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe we should make some noise," I suggested. "Scare it off." Before we could decide, a low growl emanated from the shadows ahead. It was deep, guttural, a sound that seemed too large for any creature I'd ever known. "Okay, that's it," Lisa said, her voice quavering. "I'm getting in the car." She started toward the vehicle when a pair of glowing yellow eyes appeared between the trees, higher than any animal's eyes should be, easily 7 feet off the ground. "Do you see that?" Ben stammered. We froze, our collective breath caught in our throats. The eyes stared unblinkingly, reflecting the flashlight's beam with an otherworldly intensity. Mike took a hesitant step forward. "Hello? Is someone there?" The creature stepped into the light, and my mind struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. It stood on 2 legs, towering and muscular, his body covered in coarse, dark fur. The head was unmistakably canine, elongated snout, pointed ears, but the eyes, those eyes held an unsettling intelligence. It bared its teeth, lips curling back to reveal fangs that gleamed in the dim light. A snarl rumbled from deep within its chest. "Back to the car," I whispered urgently. We moved as one, inching backward while keeping our eyes locked on the creature. It watched us, head tilted slightly, as if deciding what to do next. Ben fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. "Come on, come on," he muttered. The creature took a step forward, and the ground seemed to tremble beneath its weight. Lisa let out a muffled sob. "Get in," Mike shouted as the car doors unlocked. We scrambled inside, slamming the doors just as the creature broke into a run, charging toward us with terrifying speed. "Go! Drive!" I yelled. Ben turned the key, and the engine sputtered before roaring to life. He floored the accelerator, and the car lurched forward, tires kicking up dirt and gravel. In the rearview mirror, I saw the creature stop abruptly at the edge of the campsite, watching us flee. It let out another howl, this one filled with something akin to frustration or rage. We didn't stop driving until we reached a motel miles away, the fluorescent vacancy sign flickering like a beacon of safety. Inside the cramped room, we sat in stunned silence. "What the hell was that?" Lisa finally whispered. No one had an answer. The next morning, we returned to the campsite against my better judgment to retrieve our tents and belongings. Daylight had a way of dispelling fears, making the night's events seem almost surreal. But when we arrived, the campsite was unrecognizable. Our tents were shredded, sleeping bags torn apart, and deep gashes marred the trees surrounding the clearing. Mike knelt beside one of the claw marks etched into a tree trunk. "These are at least 8 feet high," he murmured. "Could it have been a bear?" Ben asked, though we all knew the answer. Whatever it was, it wanted to make sure we didn't come back, I said. We gathered what we could salvage and left without another word. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Back in the city, life returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the experience left a lingering shadow over all of us. Mike became withdrawn, spending hours researching local legends and folklore. Lisa refused to talk about it, immersing herself in work. Ben tried to laugh it off, but his jokes fell flat. As for me, sleep became elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those yellow eyes staring back at me. I heard the growl, felt the ground shake as it approached. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to dig deeper. I scoured the internet for any information on the Dogman. Stories abounded, eyewitness accounts dating back over a century, all describing the same creature we'd seen. One account, in particular, caught my attention. A man named Robert had encountered the Dogman near the same area in the 1980s. His description was eerily similar, but it was his warning that sent a chill through me. Once you've seen it, it doesn't forget you. I slammed the laptop shut, heart pounding. Was that why I felt like I was being watched? Was it following us? The next day, I called Mike. "I think we need to talk," I said. He agreed, and that evening we met at a quiet bar on the outskirts of town. The place was nearly empty, the dim lighting offering a semblance of privacy. "I've been doing some research," he admitted, nursing a beer. "There's a lot more to the Dogman legend than I thought." "I know," I replied. "I found an account from a guy named Robert. He said once you've seen it, it doesn't forget you." Mike's eyes darkened. "I read that too, and I think it's true." "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then pulled out his phone. "Look at this." He showed me a photo taken outside his apartment building. A blurry figure standing under a street lamp. It was tall, with the same unmistakable outline we'd seen in the woods. "I've been seeing it everywhere," he confessed. "Outside my work, in my rearview mirror. I think it's following me." A cold dread settled over me. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I didn't want to believe it," he said. "But it's getting bolder." That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Shadows seemed to shift just beyond my vision, and every sound was amplified. A branch scraping against the window, the distant wail of a siren. At 3 a.m., my phone rang. It was Lisa. "Jack," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's outside my house." My blood ran cold. "What is?" "You know what?" she said. "It's standing on the sidewalk, just staring up at my window." "Call the police," I urged. "And tell them what?" "That a mythical creature is stalking me." "I'll be right over," I said, grabbing my keys. As I sped through the deserted streets, I called Ben. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. When I arrived at Lisa's place, she was waiting on the porch, pale and wide-eyed. "Where is it?" I asked. She pointed down the street. Under the glow of a flickering street lamp, I saw a silhouette, a tall figure with broad shoulders and an animalistic stance. "It's been there for over an hour," she whispered. "Get in the car," I said. We drove to Mike's place, hoping to regroup. When we arrived, his apartment was dark. "Mike!" I shouted, pounding on the door. No response. We found the door unlocked and stepped inside. The place was in disarray, books strewn across the floor, furniture overturned. "Mike!" Lisa called out, her voice shaking. A low growl emanated from the bedroom. We froze. Slowly, the door creaked open, and Mike emerged, or what was left of him. His eyes were wild, his clothes torn. Deep scratches marred his face and arms. "Mike!" I exclaimed, rushing toward him. He recoiled. "Stay back," he rasped. "It's inside me." "What are you talking about?" Lisa cried. He looked at us with a mixture of fear and despair. "I couldn't escape it. None of us can." Before we could react, he convulsed, dropping to his knees. His body contorted unnaturally, bones cracking and reshaping. Fur sprouted from his skin. "Run!" He managed to scream before his voice deepened into a guttural snarl. We bolted from the apartment, terror propelling us forward. Behind us, the sounds of destruction echoed, furniture splintering, glass shattering. Reaching the car, we jumped in just as a massive shape burst through the apartment window, landing on the pavement with a heavy thud. It was the creature, but this time, I knew it was Mike. "Go!" Lisa screamed. I floored the accelerator, the car lurching forward. In the rearview mirror, I saw the creature give chase, its powerful limbs propelling it with terrifying speed. We weaved through the streets, heart pounding in my chest. The creature gained on us, leaping over obstacles with ease. "Head to the bridge," Lisa urged. "Maybe we can lose it there." I swerved onto the bridge, the river below glistening under the moonlight. Halfway across, the creature leaped onto the hood of the car, its weight denting the metal. I slammed on the brakes, and it was thrown forward, tumbling onto the road ahead. "Now what?" I yelled. Before she could answer, the creature rose, glaring at us with those familiar yellow eyes. An idea struck me. "Hold on." I accelerated, aiming straight for it. "Are you crazy?" Lisa shrieked. "Trust me." At the last moment, the creature leaped onto the railing of the bridge. I swerved, and the car skidded, crashing into the barrier. Metal crunched, and the front end teetered over the edge. "Get out!" I shouted. We scrambled out of the car as it tipped forward, plunging into the river below. The creature roared in fury, leaping down onto the roadway. It advanced slowly, each step deliberate. "There's nowhere to run," Lisa whispered, backing away. I looked around desperately, spotting a maintenance hatch leading under the bridge. "This way." We dashed toward it, yanking the door open and slipping inside. The space was cramped, filled with pipes and cables. We crawled along the narrow passage, the sounds of the creature's pursuit echoing behind us. "Keep moving," I urged. Emerging on the other side, we found ourselves on a narrow ledge overlooking the river. "We can't stay here," Lisa said, her eyes wide with panic. The creature appeared at the passage entrance. Snarling, it approached slowly, savoring the hunt. "Jump," I said. "What?" "Into the river." Without waiting, I grabbed her hand, and we leaped. The icy water enveloped us, the shock stealing the breath from my lungs. We surfaced, gasping, and let the current carry us downstream. Above, the creature paced along the riverbank. Unable to follow, we drifted until exhaustion overtook us, finally washing ashore miles away. In the weeks that followed, we tried to come to terms with what had happened. Mike was reported missing, his apartment found in ruins. Ben, too, had vanished without a trace. Lisa and I parted ways, the shared trauma too great a burden. I moved across the country, hoping distance would offer safety. But even now, thousands of miles away, I can't escape it. At night, I hear the distant howl, a reminder that it's still out there. I don't know why we were targeted, or how to stop it, but I do know this: some legends are real, and once you've crossed their path, they don't let you go. So if you find yourself in the woods near Manistee National Forest, and you hear a howl that makes your blood run cold, don't ignore it. Leave immediately, because some shadows are more than darkness, and some nightmares are real, and they might just be hunting you next. As the fire dies down and the shadows grow longer, we're left wondering, is the Dogman just a legend? Or is there something lurking in the forests, watching and waiting? These stories remind us that the wilderness holds more than just natural beauty. It hides secrets that may never be fully understood. If you've enjoyed this journey into the unknown, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more haunting tales. And remember, if you're camping in the woods, keep an eye out. You never know who or what might be watching.